Grateful that you've come on the show today to tell us about this process, because we must tell these stories. And good morning, everyone across Australia. Good evening, America, and welcome to those listening across the planet. Special hello to Russia and Germany this evening. You're listening to Toni Lontis, and I'm the co-host of our amazing show, the Author and Artist Hour with Kez Wickham St. George. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you're listening live on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, we have the wonderful Peo in the Philippines ready to answer your questions, take your comments, and provide you with links to anything that we talk about on the show today. And then a reminder too, if you're not listening to this live, you will be listening on replay on Binge TV Networks USA, Hero Go TV Networks USA, and the Toni TV channel on Binge Networks USA, and also on the Toni TV channel app, available on all Roku, LG, and Samsung smart TVs across the planet. Now, something that we've been starting in 2022 and for which I'm very passionate about, and that is an Australian welcome to country. And this is part of a movement that focuses and acknowledges the special and important role that Indigenous communities play in the development of this country's cultural identity. So I respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region of Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we broadcast today, and I pay my respect to the elders past and present, and all the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today and listening online and in replay. Now, my gorgeous co-host is Kez Wickham St. George, #1 best-selling author, author's mentor, artist herself, and provider of amazing video book reviews. And today's guest is an amazing man who has certainly packed a lot into one colourful life. Jem Fuller has spent years wandering round barefoot in the backwaters of the Indian subcontinent, to corporate and senior leadership roles, to time spent as a global tattooist, a fire dancer, a motorcycle courier, a healer, a kindergarten teacher, and a volunteer in third world countries. Jem has certainly lived a lot. Over the last decade, though, he has been running his own coaching practice, helping executives and senior leaders, as well as running leadership retreats in the remote Himalaya, Bali, and deserts of northwestern Australia. And we're going to ask Jem a little bit about this later. But on the show today, our purpose is to talk about Jem's newly published book, The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. It's already receiving rave reviews, and his TEDx talk is inspiring people around the planet. And we are incredibly grateful to have Jem with us today. Welcome to the show, Jem.
Wow, thank you so much, Toni. What a lovely introduction.
I'm really excited to talk about lots of things with you, and just so the listeners know, this show we're going to talk about Jem's new book because it's a powerful a discussion about communication. And on my other show, The Business Show, we're going to talk to Jem a bit further about what he does in his business life. But I'm going to stop talking for a while, and I'm going to hand over to the gorgeous Kez Wickham St. George. Hello, Kez, and welcome back.
Hello, and thank you for that lovely introduction. Jem, you are a gem. I'm sitting here reading while Tony's talking about you, introducing you. Gosh, men do need you in their lives. They don't. Well, I know you can't agree with that, but I think they do. I think they do. Men do need leadership because most boys are brought up as blokes. They're brought up, tough. Got to be a tough to be a man. And I disagree with that strongly. If you can't cry and you can't have a cuddle or want to cuddle, there's something wrong somewhere. So, yeah, I do believe a lot relies on parenthood. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Just listening to you talk then cares about how you think it's great for all of us to be able to cry when it's needed. It just reminded me of a story. There was a time when we were watching, me and my two sons, I've got two teenage boys, and when they were a fair bit younger, I think they were probably around 10 and 8 years old, and we were at the AFL Grand Final. For those of you listening overseas, that's Australian rules football. That's our big national
game.
Crazy game. And we were watching the grand final at someone's house, and it was a typical Aussie barbecue. There was meats on the barbies and dips, and everyone was having a few drinks. And it got to the end of the game, and the team who won this grand final were the underdogs, and they hadn't won a grand final for 37 years or something. And it was very emotional for them. And one of the men who was a part of this team on the TV was crying. And these two guys behind us in the room who were drinking their beers, Aussie blokes, and one of them said, look at you, you bloody wimp, bloody crying. Don't be a girl, blah, blah, blah. And my two boys at the age of 8 and 10 both just turned around completely innocently and earnestly, looked at this guy and said, what's wrong with men crying? And this guy was completely put back in his place. He kind of went, he had another slug on his beer and he felt really silly. But for my boys, they're like, why do men or boys, should they not cry, was the point.
Yeah. That came to my attention when my paternal grandmother died, and very, very close Irish family, and none of the men cried. And I could see my father just holding it in until he got home, and then he got a bad case of I thought he was hiccuping. He was in the lounge. He was actually crying, but we weren't allowed to see it. And it struck me then, why can't your mother's dead? Why aren't you crying? Yeah. And I was 7 when that happened. So it's been with me a long time when I've watched men struggle, absolutely struggle.
Imagine how unhealthy it is to repress that emotion, There was another time with one of my boys where we'd been at the shrine for my younger brother who died when he was 30 on his motorbike, and we'd been on his anniversary, we'd been at the shrine, and we were walking away, and I was holding hands with my son, and the tears were streaming down my face. And my boy looked at me and he said, Dad, I understand why we cry. And I said, why is that? And he said, well, it's because it's getting the emotion from the inside of you to the outside. It's releasing the emotion. And I was just like, yes, you're right. That's so true,
It is. It's very true. So this new book you've got, Jem, I'm interested as a book reviewer and as a reader. I'm very interested in this sort of stuff. Tell me more about your book.
The Art of Conscious Communication originally was a broader book. And the reason I was wanting to write about communication in my current role as a leadership coach, helping leaders, lead more consciously and create healthier workplace cultures, it became pretty apparent that we trip up in communication a lot. And quite often people are on the same page, or they want the same outcome, or they're on the same team, but it's in the miscommunication that comes conflict or misunderstanding. And also working, my partner and I have run relationship retreats for years. And quite often in a relationship, you've got two people who love each other, but they're just missing each other in the communication. And it also seems that communication is so important for us for so many reasons, but even to just have an idea and to manifest that idea into reality is impossible without communication.
Yeah.
And then more broadly and politically, globally at the moment, it's so upsetting to watch people shouting at each other across these digital divides of different and this identity politic that's really taken hold. And I believe this and you believe that, so we're just going to shout at each other.
Can't come together.
No, and it's really not helping us as a global community. I believe that the way forward is in better communication. Because there's stuff we've all got in common, we all have the same color blood. We all care about our children. We all need food and water and shelter. We have a lot in common, and we are actually all subject to the same finite resources on this planet.
Mm.
You know? But we've identified indifferences and forgotten how to communicate. So I was pretty passionate about that. And then as I started to write the book, I engaged a mentor, a book writing mentor, and she suggested to me that I narrow the audience a little bit. She said, pick an audience to write for rather than writing for everybody.
Important.
She said, do you know what? I think men really need to hear this right now. So I started, and then I called it The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. And wrote it for men, but it's for everybody. And I feel like this book will find its way into the hands of good men through the hands of good women, because women are more likely to pick up self-development books and read,
I agree.
and then go to their partners and suggest it.
Yes, I agree entirely.
Absolutely.
I find that communication with men, when I have a boy of my own, and our communication started off as mummy, son, and as he's growing older, and I've noticed with my husband too, our communication has changed. Like the way they now from boyhood right up to a senior man, our communication changes with each other. So it's my husband's now retired, but it's like the communication between us has changed completely. I no longer say goodbye, there's your lunchbox, I'll see you in 2 weeks' time, because he was a FIFO. But it's strange the way that happens. It just happens. It's like someone's tapped a magic wand overnight and you are now a real married couple, and your language changes. Because he's always worked away from home. So it's funny the way you all have to fit in and respect each other.
Yeah, that's right. And for men too, in a lot of cultures, not all cultures, but predominantly in Western cultures, men have been indoctrinated into what's acceptable culturally. And so there are these stereotypes within which we feel we have to fit. And they've come understandably from, world wars and industrial revolutions and times of depression and hardship, where you did have to suck it up and put on a stiff upper lip, and you couldn't show your vulnerability. That was a weakness, and all of this cultural stuff that's been put onto men. And so men in my culture in Australia, and I think also to a certain degree in America, you can't show your emotions, you can't show your vulnerabilities, and that you'd have to be able to do that to be able to communicate more authentically and to connect to your emotions. I believe men have access to the full range of emotions. It's just that we've buried them so deep because we thought we were allowed to do that.
Jem, I want to stay on the subject of men in general across the globe at the moment. I actually feel for men in general, because I know from a female perspective that there are many, many women stepping up and rising up and speaking out and talking their truth, etc., etc. And what appears to be happening for a lot of men is that they feel very threatened or insecure or unsafe. And so the rhetoric back at the women that are rising up is quite toxic. And I knew that you were coming on the show, and I hope hope this is okay to bring this up, but your book is about communication and men. And so my question is, how do we address this? Because for the world to work in beautiful harmony, we need equal masculine and equal feminine energy, and it needs to be balanced. And for millennia, it has been unbalanced, and across, generally speaking, within different humans, it can be very balanced. However, generally speaking, it's been very unbalanced. How do you talk to men about what's going on globally? And in specifically, if you see some of the conversation in Australia around men and women and how we show up or don't, and if you take instances that are pretty powerfully thought-provoking across our current media, for example, the recent image of our Prime Minister and Grace Tame, and the rhetoric that was directed at her because she did not smile. How do we have more fruitful conversations between men and women about these issues? Because from most women's perspective, it's not about hating men. It's just wanting you to understand what it's like for a woman and to acknowledge that there is inequality, that we aren't listened to, that we aren't respected. And those conversations, how do we start having those, Jem?
Yeah, I think it's got to start, and it's a big piece of work, because
Yes.
what we're trying to do is shift a deeply ingrained cultural misappropriation and misunderstanding.
Absolutely.
So it's a big piece of work, and I believe it has got to start with education and understanding. Quite often when humans behave unacceptably towards each other, it comes from a place of fear, and fear comes from the unknown. So if men, and I'm doing this in inverted commas because it's a generalization, but when men don't understand women, or the masculine doesn't understand the feminine, or vice versa, that's when the fear comes in, and that's when the behavior is not functional. So I believe it's an education piece. And the other thing too, Toni, like you said, I completely believe that we need to bring back into balance masculine and feminine energy.
Yeah.
And the misconception is that people think masculine energy means men and feminine energy
It doesn't.
means
It's in both of us.
right. So men have got access to their feminine. And what's missing, I believe, especially in our corporate and governmental structure, what's missing is the feminine wisdom, the feminine intuition, the feminine sensibility, the feminine human centricness. Now we can all access this, but men don't. A lot of men don't know anything about what this is. So we need to educate them to it, because once you understand it and you go, oh, wow, that's what feminine energy is. That's what feminine intuition is. We could really do with some more of that in my workplace, or in my community, or in my society. So I think it's going to start with education and understanding around what we're actually talking about.
Yeah, and I think, Jem, that you writing about this and knowing you as a person, you're an important part of those conversations that we need to start having around the way that we communicate, and for men to understand that it's no longer okay to attack when you fearful about what another woman is saying, and conversely, that women are allowed to have a view, and it might be different from your view. Women should not be told about how they appear, what they say, what they wear, and it's about respecting that they're allowed to have an opinion. And if Grace Tame, for instance, doesn't like the Prime Minister, that's okay. And I would agree that, and I'm wondering what you think about this, Jem, that having an office of stature, i.e. being the Prime Minister of Australia, does not mean that you automatically gain respect, does it? And so just being in that position doesn't give you the right to expect people to respond to you in a certain way. And that actually comes back to communication, doesn't it?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as you were talking then, Toni, I'm thinking that perhaps even if you're holding, a position in office or in the public eye, that you should actually be trying to work harder at authentically earning respect.
Absolutely.
And look, I personally don't believe that it is ever functional or acceptable or okay for anybody to be horrible to anybody else.
Yes,
right?
I agree.
Stop. And so, and what I've found in working, I work with a lot of men and a lot of women. I actually ran women's retreats in Bali for 7 years until COVID came. And what I find is that generally people are good people. Most men are actually good human beings. They don't want to behave inappropriately. They just don't have the tools to how to make the shift. So for example, you could have a bunch of blokes standing around and one guy makes a derogatory comment about a woman. Right? The other men in that group, and even the guy who made the derogatory comment, if they were really quiet and they really listened into their own conscience, was that a good thing to do? Most of them
No, it wasn't.
They just don't have the tools or the courage to call each other on that. And so they're complicit. So they go along with it and they go, oh, yeah, what a beauty, or whatever they say. But in the book, there's a whole chapter where I'm giving men tools and strategies on how they can call their mates out and go, hey, mate, that wasn't okay to say that. You know, we can have a laugh and we can have a joke without putting women down or without being derogatory or even abusive in our language, you know. So giving men the tools to create the change, because most men are good men. They just don't know how.
Yeah.
I agree.
It does go back to that education at a fundamental level, doesn't it, Jem? And we seem to have missed that in recent decades, or we're just not doing it right.
Yeah.
I went, not off the subject, but I went to the movies yesterday and I saw this movie which absolutely shocked me. I had to get up and leave. It was all about an old folks' home and how men were just so horrible to the woman, and all the women, they just wanted love affairs. And it depicted the old age way of looking at men and women. Women were there for one thing only, and so were men. I actually left the theatre because I felt insulted. I also thought, I hope that's not me in the future, but I actually felt really insulted. You know, it was like, why hasn't someone told the movie producer that this is just not on anymore? Why hasn't someone educated him? Education is the way out of any argument. And I think when men and women learn that we can actually have a conversation without an argument, it's just going to make the place so much better.
Yeah, absolutely. When people argue and emotions start to get in the way of a functional conversation, it's really only because they're getting defensive and defending their sense of identity. Egos jumping and involved. And when we can remember that if we're just going to have a conversation and we can disagree, we can share our points of view, we can actually lean in and seek to understand the other person's point of view when it's different to ours. That this is the way forward. This is the way to create change. You know, one of the fundamental things that need to change for us to create a situation where we should have more women in decision-making roles and more women in leadership. The world needs it, right?
Yes.
But at the same time, there's a concurrent project that needs to be happening, which is changing the way those environments exist. There's no point in allowing women into leadership roles if
it's toxic,
that masculine toxic game. We need to change the game so it's not a man's game anymore. It's a people's game, and that we can encourage, you know, this feminine wisdom into the corporate and the political worlds.
Jim,
so sorry, Toni.
No, you go, Kes. You go first.
Getting off the subject of leadership, I want to learn more about your barefoot in India and why.
Why barefoot in India? You end up in these chapters in your life and you can look back retrospectively and think, how did I get there? A couple of reasons. It was and then a part of my first identity crisis in my late 20s. And I had got to a point of, when I was younger, I was very anti-establishment. I really wanted to buck the system. And I ended up, kind of trying to find a sense of identity as a punk in London. I was living in squats. I was really anti the system. And then I got to a point, broken heart, my childhood sweetheart and I broke up necessarily, but I was completely brokenhearted and pretty lost, actually. And then my sister flew into London. She was working in Europe and she reminded me, remember, you're here saving up to get back to India, because I'd already fallen in love with India. And so I remembered what was going on. I got a ticket to India, and I got to India and I thought, I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't so-and-so's partner. I wasn't an actor. I used to be an actor and I'd left that behind. I hadn't really been in touch with my family much, so I didn't have that sense of identity. So I really didn't know who I was. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to run an experiment. I'm going to let go of all of those vehicles that I identified with. and I'm going to let go of any future design. So not what am I going to do in a year from now, or what am I hoping to achieve in a career? What am I even going to do tomorrow? I let go of. And I just woke up each day, and if I felt like moving, I'd pack my pack and I'd move. And then part of the barefoot thing was that I really wanted to experience the culture not as a tourist. I didn't want beggars coming up and begging from me. I didn't want people thinking, here's another rich tourist and charging me more. I wanted to disappear into the culture. So I grew a beard and I had dreadlocks. I wore very, very simple.
I can see you like that, actually.
Yeah. So I had a long beard, I had dreadlocks. I wore a lungi, which is just a piece of material wrapped around, and a very basic t-shirt. I stripped all of my belongings right back. I had a little small bag, and I even got a little kerosene cooker and some pots, and I'd have my spices with me, and I'd go into the local markets and buy the veggies and go and live outdoors predominantly and cook on a fire. I went super, super simple and basic. And it got to the point where I did disappear into the fabric of their culture, and people stopped begging from me. There was actually, if we've got time, one remarkable story which really stood out.
Yes, please.
I was sitting on a train, and I used to travel in the cattle class. I didn't want to buy a seat or a bed. I wanted to sit with the untouchables because I really wanted to immerse myself. So I'm sitting on the floor, all crammed up through the night, just outside the toilets, which is not a really nice place to be. But sitting next to the open door of this train as it click-clacked through the night. And next to me was a woman who was from the untouchable class and caste, and she had her 3 little kids climbing over her and me. And through the night, she didn't speak any English, and I spoke a couple of words of Hindi, but we communicated with gestures and nods and non-verbal communication. And she was sharing her assorted nuts out of the rolled up newspaper with me. And her kids were kind of climbing on me, and then one of her kids fell asleep on me, and she was looking at me, is this okay? And I'm like, yeah, it's fine. And so we had this really beautiful connection with no words spoken.
Beautiful.
Anyway, in the morning, the train slowed down at a rural train stop in the middle of nowhere. And the trains in India quite often don't fully stop at these small stations. They just slow to walking speed, and people jump on and off the moving train.
Oh, wow.
And, yeah, so she scooped up her kids and her few belongings. And as she was climbing over me to get out of the train, she reached her hand out to me. And I thought she was shaking my hand or something. It was in the wee hours of the morning, and I was kind of half asleep. So I reached my hand out. She pushed a 10 rupee note into my hand. She gave me money. I had $10,000 sitting in an offshore bank account, right? And I thought, and that she was, in her culture, I was a sadhu or a holy man or a stinky hippie.
Okay.
And they support, so it's a sadhu in India traditionally is a man who has given up their worldly possessions to go and seek spiritual enlightenment. I was just a hippie kind of cruising around brokenhearted, trying to find my identity again. But so she was supporting me. And for a split second, I felt like a fraud and I felt really bad. And she jumped off the train. I said, sister, no, in Hindi, didi, nay, nay. But she was gone. And she'd given me 10 rupees, which was 20 cents or something. And I thought, wow, I've made it. I've become assimilated into this culture.
Yeah.
And that for me was really important because then I could experience the people. Not as an outsider. So that's the Barefoot in India story.
Oh, wow. It's amazing.
Jem, what is it about India that encourages these human experiences to go back to basics? What is it about India? Because it's one country that I've not been to yet. So I want to understand what it is. Is it the spiritualism? What is it?
Yeah, it's... well, for a start, India is a place you either love it or you hate it.
Yeah.
Some people are really confronted by India. And I think, you know, I was really spending a lot of time in India back in the 90s. So it's changed a lot in the last few decades. The extremes are still there. Yeah. But there's a massive growing middle class that wasn't there when I was backing around. Okay. There's a big middle class now. But what is it about India? I think for me, coming from a Western culture where it was either religion or atheism, so to speak.
Yes.
And I grew up in a Christian household.
Yeah.
I went to a private Catholic boys' school. My dad was a Uniting Church. I went to church every Sunday until I was 16, when I said to mum and dad, I'm not going to church anymore.
Yeah.
You know, how can millions of Hindus and Muslims and Jains and Jews, how can they all be wrong? How can they all be going to hell just because they're Christian?
Yes.
Yeah.
And luckily, mum and dad were intelligent enough to not be able to argue that. And they said, well, fair enough, you don't have to come to church if you don't want to anymore. But there was no space for me here in Australia for a rich sense of spirituality if it wasn't religion. Whereas in India, it's their way of life. You know, everything has a spiritualness to it. There's a reverence. And whether you're a Hindu or a Jain or a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian, it doesn't matter. And whether you're not even religious, but you're just spiritual, it's a part of the way of life. So it was okay for me to go and explore what spirituality meant to me, and all the other backpackers that go there and look for it as well. So I think that's a big draw card to India.
Okay.
I found India very giving, very, very giving. Everybody was willing to give you something. You only had to look, you know, just look in someone's direction, and they were offering you things. And I was completely floored by their generosity and their humble attitude.
Yeah, so much so. So, and their ability to find joy and happiness when they have next to nothing.
Oh yes, yeah. Because I got right into their ceremony, because I love ceremonies. So yeah, I didn't join in because I didn't know the language or what to do, but I thought, you know, I was there in the audience every time something was on. I was there. It was like, this is just amazing. It's so different. I come from New Zealand, again, another spiritual country, but so different. It was amazing. I'd like to go back one day.
Yeah, me too. I mean, I do up until COVID. We take people there every year. My partner and I run retreats up in the northern Himalaya of India. And I think another draw card for me to India was the same reason that I was drawn to other countries that are culturally very different to ours. And again, at the time, I wasn't so conscious of this. I really just wanted to go to places that were really different to mine. And now looking back, I think it was because I know it was because I was drawn to human connection, but cross-cultural connection. I really wanted to sit down with someone who spoke a different language, had a different religion, had a different upbringing, but find things that we could connect on. You know, it's really important to me to find this human connection across these differences.
Fabulous.
Jem, do you think that human connection is part of the way forward in helping men communicate better? Do you think that's an important piece of the puzzle?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I remember listening to a podcast. It was actually on Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast, and he was interviewing a guy. I wish I could remember his name, but you'd be able to look it up. But this guy was a former neo-Nazi.
Wow.
And, you know, the head of a neo-Nazi collective in one of the cities, and his background was horrific. It was violent and horrible. And he somehow had a life change and got out of it. Jump forward now to what he does, and he's a mediator, and he mediates between different groups of people. And he said that the strategy for his mediation is, first we start with what we've got in common. First, we start with what we've got in common, and then we work from there. You know, if we start with differences, we're not going to get anywhere, because we can easily disagree on things.
That's right.
You know, we've got to find what we've got in common. And quite often people, through their fear, have a hatred of someone else who they've never met.
That's right.
They've never met anyone from this group of people that they hate, and they haven't actually had a conversation with them. So yeah, I think it's really communication. I mean, communication, the word comes from the Latin noun communicatio, which is a sharing, and the verb communicare, which means to make common. You know, so communication is about us coming together and to make common, to have a common understanding together.
And common ground from which to explore life and conversations and everything. If you start at that common ground, that's a great point, Jem. Kez, you got another question?
I have. because we're getting right away from leadership here, but I want to know more and more about you, Jem. Tattooing. Now, being an artist, I'm right into this. So tell me about your tattooing days.
Yeah, sure. Look, I always liked tattoos, and I didn't get my first tattoo until I was 21. But then, just was into getting more and more tattoos. And then through being part of that community, and then was part of a tattoo community in London for a while. And then when I was in India one time, somehow I came across some tattoo ink. Someone gave me a little container of black tattoo ink. And I thought, I'm going to try tattooing myself by hand. I literally just got sewing needles. and I burnt end of sewing needles. And then I strung them with some cotton onto a stick. And I dipped the stick into the ink and I tattooed an om on my wrist, which is still there.
Wow. Gosh, that's good.
That was wow, like almost 30 years ago, and it's still pretty good, right?
Yeah.
And I went, oh, that worked. I can do that. So then I think I tattooed myself again, and then a traveler said, oh, you can tattoo me. And I was like, oh no, you don't want me to tattoo you. I don't know what I'm doing. And it began. And so I started tattooing other travelers, and then it got to the point where the artwork was good enough that we could trade. So, someone would give me something and I'd give them a tattoo, and I just started tattooing more and more, and got proper needles and everything like that, but still always tattooing by hand. And then it got to a point where the work was good enough for me to charge for it. And it was a wonderful cash trade while I was traveling the world, because it didn't take up any room in my backpack. I just had a thing of, clean autoclaved needles and ink and some chopsticks, and that was it. I ended up doing that. And then when I came back to Australia, I traveled for many, many years. And then one time I came back to Australia and got a job in a studio. So I got a proper tattoo job, still tattooing by hand. And then, and I think you'll get this, Kez, then the art and the ceremony and the ritual for me, because tattooing is one of the oldest rituals for us humans. And the art ceremony of the rituals started to get not even just diluted, it started to get perverted and lose its meaning for me, because I'd have these people coming in off the street and looking at the board up on the wall and going, I want number 32, please, and getting a heart with a thing through it or something. There was no meaning to it. It had lost its essence, So I moved away from it because I wanted to preserve my relationship with tattooing as being something more tribal. And it's a position that I still hold in my community. I don't do it very often, but if I feel that it's meaningful and it's someone that I care about, then I will.
I was going to say, Jem, I have one tattoo and it was very ceremonial and has deep meaning around that one tattoo. And I've actually been recently playing with some more. But yes, for me, it's not about the tattoo, it's about the meaning behind it, and and I don't want to make that a rushed decision. So I understand that and again, I've not heard people talk about it in that way, with the deep meaning and ceremony behind it. So it's good to talk about that today. Before I return us back to leadership, before we run out of time, I was also interested about the fire dancing.
You're pulling out all my old hippie travel stories.
I know. They're great.
Yeah, look, and this will segue back into the leadership in a sec. Remind me to come back to this, and I think it's important that I've lived a very, very alternative life, and then I went into the corporate world for 8 years, and found a way to communicate in that context, and now to be the bridge between such difference. I think it's really important for us. But anyway, the fire dancing, I met some other travelers. Again, this was back in the 90s, before it was really very, very popular. And I met some travelers from Europe who are still friends of mine, and they were twirling fire. They had fire stars and toys, and they were twirling fire. And I just loved it. I was like, wow, that looks amazing. So I got myself a couple of sticks and I got myself some poi. I started teaching myself, and before lighting it on fire, obviously you're learning the actual technique of it.
Yeah.
And it's really beautiful because it's a dance. You know,
It is.
you're dancing. It's really in your body, and it's a real connection to body and movement and dance. So I really enjoyed that part of it. And then the adrenaline of lighting it on fire and possibly burning yourself. So I started doing that, and then I just kept doing it as a hobby. And then some years later, my then wife and I, we were on a 2-year kind of working honeymoon around the world after we got married, and we were in Taiwan as kindergarten teachers. I was a kindergarten teacher for a year, and I was standing outside a pub one night in Taiwan twirling fire, and a Taiwanese performance agent came up to me and said, "Hey, do you want some work? I can get you really good at doing that." So my wife and I put a little routine together, and we earned ridiculously good money standing outside the department stores in Taipei on a stage twirling fire, and we were the novelty because these two Westerners twirling fire outside the big department stores, and we paid, you know, like a month's wage for a 10-minute show kind of thing. So
wow,
that's how that started.
Yeah. What an amazing life you've had. You really have. So all these experiences, they prompted you into writing the book?
They certainly all of these different experiences, and you can imagine there's plenty more, all of them came together to give me at the age of 50 what I felt was something worth sharing, worth offering. And I feel I've got to a place in my life where I could offer some tips and some advice with authenticity because I've lived it. Everything in the book that I share is something that I've learned and practiced. It hasn't all come from me, and some that I have just made up. But it's just as, you know, I say at the start of the book, before the prologue, this is not a scientific paper. This is not me trying to prove anything. This is just a bunch of travel stories and some stuff that I've figured out that works, and I'm sharing it with you. So it's very humble. But no, the book didn't come directly from the travel experiences. The book came from the last 8.5 years I've been running my own coaching practice. And so I've coached many thousands of hours and hundreds of people. And like I said at the top of us talking, really understanding that a lot of the times when us humans trip up is in miscommunication. So I thought it was important to talk about how we can improve our communication.
Jem, I'm going to bring my next question back to leadership and particularly that CEO executive level of leadership. So my background is in nursing, and I had a theory around dealing with doctors, specialists and surgeons. And most of those, as you know, are predominantly men. And my theory was that they spent so much time learning the technical and science around medicine, surgery, etc., that no one stopped to teach them about social skills and communication. And I'm wondering if that theory applies to executives who have spent a lifetime of a gathering working experience, and then they get to those top levels of management and still haven't learnt how to communicate. Do you find that in your practice, Jem?
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree with what you're saying. And there's another thing that plays into and supports what you just said, Toni, which is that, you know, there's 4 understood behavioral styles, and we all have a blend of them. Some of us have one style that's a very strong lead style, but it's no accident that a surgeon ends up becoming a surgeon, or an executive ends up becoming an executive. They end up becoming those professional roles due to their behavioral style, largely, and also their upbringing and lots of other contextual stuff. But 2 of the behavioral styles are very masculine energy, so not men. There's women there, as well, but they're very masculine energy styles. And these 2 styles are the very technical and autocratic and decision-making, result-focused. So just get the result, don't worry about the relationship. So they don't have a natural way into emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence can be taught, thankfully. We can learn emotional intelligence. These two behavioral styles are not naturally emotionally intelligent because that's not what they're focused on. They're focused on getting the result. Whereas the other two behavioral styles, which are more feminine energy styles, and there's lots of men with these styles.
Yes.
Feminine energy styles, they're more focused on the relationship. So they're more nurturing, caring, emotionally intelligent, careful in their communication. So I coached the head nurse at one of the big private hospitals here in Melbourne for a while. And I was helping her with leadership, and we had this conversation. It's no accident that most nurses have the mother, nurturer, carer behavioral style. That's what they've ended up with as a nurse, right? So they're doing emotional intelligence and being careful with their bedside manner and the way they communicate information to the patient. And then you've got the doctor coming in who's just focused on the result with no natural aptitude towards being careful about how they communicate. You get this divide, and the nurses are saying, God, you don't have to be so abrupt and so rude about it. And the doctor's thinking, what are you getting upset for? I'm just telling you 2 milligrams, not 3. So, and also, you put on top of that, I don't know if the medical degree here in Australia has changed, but last time I asked someone about it, there's no course in there on how to communicate.
I was just going to say, I keep asking too, because it was one of the key factors in actually leaving nursing and hospitals and healthcare was the fact that you just have to work with some really unpleasant people. And sorry, before I let Kez ask the next question, just at that level, executive level, that you talk to, do they recognize that there's deficiencies? Again, from my nursing experience, it was the nurse managers and the nurse leaders that readily recognized when there were deficiencies in their leadership or their management style, but not so much the men. And I'm wondering if that's changing from your experience.
Yeah, look, from my experience, it is changing. Having said that, also we attract to us what we're putting out there. So the executive males that I coach are reasonably open to this stuff.
I wondered.
But I think men who are in an executive leadership role realize when there's a communication deficiency, when they're not getting the result. So they've tried to communicate something and it's not working. Their team are not listening to them, or their team are not moving in the direction they want them to move in, or the KPIs, heaven forbid, and the numbers are not adding up to what they want. And so they're forced to go, hell, why won't these people bloody listen to me?
Because I said.
Well, because of the way I'm delivering it is the next step that I help them get to. Right. So it's because of the way you're delivering it that it's not being listened to. So let's explore different ways of communicating. And that's where I come in and help them.
I'm too busy listening to you, Jem. my antennas are out there because I'm also thinking all sorts of other things that we could do with your book.
Great. I love to hear that. I need your help.
I'm here to help. So if we encourage, as you said, the woman to buy the book so we can actually get our men folk to read, that's what I'm hearing, because men don't pick that book up. There's got to be, I hate saying this, but the younger men, which are more trained in the use of their emotions, they will read it. But it's the older folks, the ones like the doctors and the specialists that are really abrupt. That's how they talk to, like 2 and 2 are 4, not 4.5. Yeah. And so where a woman will play with that 4.5, but what else can I add? What can I take away? That's what women do. And I would love to see this book, hang it out to all the, on the plane. As the men take off to go FIFO, it's in the seat of the plane. That's, in the pocket at the back of the plane. That's where I'd like to see the book. I think, if you, instead of having the instructions of what if we fall out of the air and what to cope with, let's have the book instead.
I love it. Yeah.
That's a great idea, Kes.
I think that a lot of older men, that are getting towards the end of their careers, and these are the ones that are in the most seats of power. A lot of them trying to teach an old dog new tricks. I don't mean to be pessimistic or negative. I'm trying to be realistic. It's really hard to do with a lot of them. So
I agree.
I'm kind of removing myself from the immediate moment and looking at this on a broader macro time scale, and this cultural shift and this education and this having more women and more feminine wisdom in the way we run the world is a longer term project. Now, I know it can't be too long term because the world might not be here in 50 years, but
I was going to say it's got to change in the next 50 years. Absolutely.
If we're looking at men that are still just towards the end of their careers and they're determined to not change, and they're in their late 60s and in their 70s and stuff, then pretty soon get out of it. Let's have the next generation of young men who are more emotionally intelligent, who are more inclusive of women working together with them, not trying to be a man, just being a woman, because that's what we need. You know, I think that's where we should be focusing our education efforts. You know, if I had to choose,
I tend to disagree a little bit there. I think that the older men, they need to be educated on how to teach the younger men. It all is an education, no matter which way you want to plant the seed. Sure. If we trained our senior men to teach our younger generation, I mean, because even my grandson, who was only 21, he's a much gentler version of my son. And they're all in different, you know, my son's in his 40s. So I see this 20-year-old grandson, and he's so gentle and kind. And I look at my son, and he's like, dig up the earth, rip out the tree, you know, plant, you know, something. And then there's my husband, who doesn't know where to turn. So you've got all these generations of men, Jim, and I happen to live with them. And I'm going around in circles half the time thinking, oh, what's your opinion? So,
please give my book to all three generations. And it's just that anyone, we can't help anyone change or learn or grow if they're determined not to. Yeah. So it can only be, regardless of the generation, it's got to be someone who's open to it. And that's why I think it will find its way to men through the hands of good women. And the women that have read the book, the feedback that I'm getting is, wow, I loved this book because so much of it is applicable to humans, regardless of gender. And also they said it's helped me understand my man better. Because I'm getting an insight into the way it is for a man to be. So it's given me a deeper level of understanding of him.
Yeah, so I think that's a good strategy. I think that, women buy this book, read it yourself, and then give it to your man, because it will help both of you. Jem, I'm conscious of the times, and I want to make sure that we let the audience know where's the best place to buy your book and how to connect with you.
Best place to connect with me is through my website, gemfuller.com. You can also buy the book there, so you can find the books page of the website and you can buy it there. Or if you prefer to buy it on Amazon, if you've got an Amazon account, either in the States or in Australia, wherever. If you're in Australia, you can get it on Booktopia. You can also go into your local book shop if you want to.
And ask them for it.
And ask them for it, because they can jump on their computer and have it ordered in by a distributor. So whatever's easiest for you to get. It's on Kindle. And this Friday, I'm really excited. This Friday,
you're going to do the audiobook?
Audible, yeah. On Friday, we're recording it. So
good, because that's the one I want. That was my next question. Are you going to do the Audible? I'm an Audible consumer. I rarely buy physical books. I listen because it goes into my subconscious, and that's the best place for it to sit.
Yeah, beautiful. I listen to my books because of time prior to COVID. I was commuting a lot, and my commute was when I would devour books by listening to them.
Yeah. Oh, that's exciting. So this Friday you're producing the audio version?
We're recording it on Friday, and then it'll go into post-production, and however quickly after that we get it done, we'll upload it.
Oh, that's
amazing.
Awesome.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great.
Jem,
if I can offer you one thing, if you can get the book to me, I'd like to review and promote it for you. That's the other part I do. If you'd like to do that, I will email you and send you my physical address, because I don't do email books. I find that really hard to show and tell. So yeah, you can send one to me. That would be lovely. And look, I'm quite happy to have a private chat with you about doing another book. I can see you in a bigger field.
Oh, Jem's got a whole series of books planned, Kez. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've chatted about this. Wonderful, Kez, Jem. We are completely out of time and I don't want to run over today and keep you past our time. Jem, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Kez, you know that I love co-hosting with you. The book is called, Jem?
The Art of Conscious Communication for Thoughtful Men. And Jem Fuller. And I just checked before we did this show together. I just checked and I went on to Amazon.com and I just typed in Jem Fuller and it's there.
I was going to say, I checked too because I'm like, I need to get a copy of this book. All right, wonderful team. Jem, you and I will be talking on my other shows shortly. Not this week, in a couple of weeks, I think. Kez, thank you so much. Jem, what a delight to have you on the show sharing your experience. If you want to connect with Jem, please do. jemfuller.com. The book is there, also on Amazon, and we wish you every success. And that, my wonderful audience, is your lot for this week. We will be back next week with another awesome guest. Thanks, Jem. Thanks, Kez. Bye for now.
Bye.
I'm so grateful that you've come on the show today to tell us about this process because we must tell these stories. We